Hi guys, just going to talk you through these demonstration videos of long pips and anti-spin versus float balls. In both cases the long pips and the anti-spin are the black rubber, the red is just my ordinary inverted. Starting here, I'm twiddling on every ball just to demonstrate, I guess, the two techniques. You can have a look how they're just slightly different for the inverted side versus the long pip side. This being my Stiga Destroyer Ox no sponge long pips, and because it is a float ball, it really is just more or less a little forward and slightly downward dab at the ball, just to squirt it out low and reasonably fast. I'm reaching kind of the limits there, and really reaching the limits on virtually how fast I can hit the ball there. It's actually landing quite deep on the table. And again, now I'm just sticking with the long pip shot itself, and really nothing particularly exotic, not a lot of wrist, just a good safe way to handle a float ball without taking too much risk and allowing me to move it around. And just a little bit of twiddling here. Now again, you can see the free arm is being used just to help me counterbalance. I'm trying to stay in a fairly square stance as much as possible. One thing you will notice is that my waiting position is a little bit on the backhand with my bat, mainly because I know the ball's coming to my backhand every time. But really the technique with this is just your bread and butter safe technique with the long pips. Nothing risky, just keeps the ball feeding without taking too much of a risk. Now we're moving to the actual, what I call my roll technique with the long pips. Although in the video it kind of looks like the ball's coming off quite fast off my bat, in reality it's actually a reasonably slow roll. The video is a little bit deceptive in that particular perspective, and all I'm trying to do here is not trying to belt the hell out of the ball. All I really want to do is get the bat underneath it, and rather than try and brush upwards with the pips, it's more of a lift with a slightly open bat and a little bit of brushing. And now I'm just moving to more of a hitting, where I am trying to get a little bit of brushing with the pips to allow me to generate whatever top spin I can with the long pip rubber to bring the ball down on the other side. Although this isn't particularly my favourite stroke, as you can probably tell. And now moving to a technique where I'm just going to alternate between a push and a roll, just to allow you to contrast the two styles. Again, it's just my basic safety roll, which although my arm moves quite quick, the ball goes off fairly slow off the bat and changes pace, and I use it generally to bring in the opponent, change pace on him, get a hesitant return, and then it would usually be a twiddle and follow up with my inverted rubber. Again, trying to stay balanced on the feet. You can see there's not a lot of shoulder turn in these strokes, there's no need for a lot of rotation. It's also a good perspective to see where I'm hitting the ball in relation to my torso, and you can see it's generally within the torso itself. It's between my left hip and my belly button. That's where my comfortable line is. And again, just starting to hit a little bit harder here. And I actually found it quite difficult with the long pips to really hit hard because of the control's not quite there compared to anti-spin, and definitely difficult to generate that top spin to bring the ball down. Okay, moving now to just a push, a roll and a hit, just to contrast the three styles. And now I'm attempting to do a few successful hits with the long pips, having some success. It's not always easy to pick it up from this angle, but one thing that's very noticeable for myself is that there is definitely not a lot of dip generated by hitting with the long pips. It's very hard to generate a lot of topspin off a float ball. Consequently, my margin for error is very low, and you can see it here where I'm hitting quite a few into the net, into the top of the net, and if I go up a little bit higher I tend to miss off the end of the table. So there's actually a very small hitting zone where I can be successful in hitting that ball. And so for me, although it is satisfying when you make the shot, I would consider this off a low float ball, trying to do this driving technique with long pimples. I would tend to call that a fairly low percentage option, and it certainly wouldn't be something that I myself would be trying to use very much in my game, because I'd be making more mistakes than I'd be having success with. So again, it's satisfying when it works, but tends to be a lower percentage working in that favour. And now just contrasting a little bit of my roll versus the hit to allow you to see really how the two techniques differ a little. Much more driving forward and just a little roll upwards. Okay, now let's have a look on the forehand side instead. Again, just starting with the basic push. You can see here is a good perspective for actually seeing how I do tend to dip my right shoulder a little bit on this forehand push to give myself a better angle for swinging the bat. Other than that, I'm not doing anything really fancy with the stroke. Now just rolling a few over. Again, the bat just gets a little bit below the float ball, allowing me just to roll up and over. One thing I'm doing here is really allowing gravity to bring the ball down, because I can't generate too much topspin with the roll, which limits how hard I can hit. But that's okay, because I'm not looking to hit with a lot of power normally anyway, because I'm using the change of pace to throw off my opponent a little bit. So it works quite well. I usually want a little bit of leeway over the net. I'm not looking to hit an inch over the net. If I can go 6 inches over the net, that's fine. And now moving into hitting, which for me is relatively unfamiliar, as you can probably see in terms of my success rate. It's not a shot I use a lot. And again, the margin for error here is low. A little bit too low, I'll hit the tape. A little bit too high, and I'll fly off the end of the table. Again, it's satisfying when it works, but with long pips against a low float ball such as this, really a low percentage shot. So nice when it works, but not something I'd recommend on a regular basis to any close to the table attackers using long pips. The driving with the long pips against a float ball would be what I would consider a low percentage strategy. And just finishing off there. Okay, just moving on, just a few more pushes. Just a very simple technique, bat behind the ball, elbow bent, free arm doing its job, and just staying loose with my feet and relaxed, not trying to do anything too fancy with the wrist. Again, moving to just a roll. And again, you can see here a good example, if you watch the follow through, of how I'm not crossing across my body, just using that saluting motion to allow me to recover very easily to my basic ready position. And now moving into more of a hitting mode. And again, you can see how I'm trying to keep that follow through from crossing my body too much. Bring the arms back down and into ready position. Having a little bit more success hitting as I got used to it. And now I'm moving into a push, a roll and a hit, just to demonstrate and compare the three different techniques. And this is one of the, I guess, cornerstones of my coaching, is that I prefer to keep things as simple, as efficient as possible, and try not to complicate things too much. And really you can see here that it is basically just a very simple stroke in all three cases. I don't try and complicate it with too many flourishes or anything like that. In this little bit I'm just going to demonstrate some of my attempts to use some side spin strokes against the float ball. And apart from the fact that I'm really not a big user of side spin in these sort of techniques, the first thing I noticed myself from performing these was that there was really no side spin generated whatsoever on the forehand or the backhand. So the only deception I was getting would be from the fact that possibly to the opponent it might look like I'm trying to side spin, but the ball was going straight through. But there's definitely there was no wobble, there was no curve in the air, none of the things that we usually come to associate with that ability to bend the ball a little bit. So the only deceptive part that I was generating at all was the fact that it looks a little bit like I'm trying to side spin, and in fact the ball would go straight on. Other than that, very little effect at all, and as such, off a float ball I wouldn't recommend using very much. Okay, time to contrast, I guess, now using the Antispin, which is just your Saka anti-power in about 2 mil sponge. You can hear it from the difference in the sound. The actual stroke itself, you can see first thing that comes to mind from viewing is that my stroke is a little bit longer, and there go the couple of hits that went well off the end of the table just because the throw angle is so much higher. It's much easier to lift the ball. But the control with the anti-spin is definitely a little bit better than the control with the long pips once you're used to the different throw angle. Very easy here to roll the ball, and as I started to hit, it really did feel very, very easy to do. And because the anti-spin is fairly gripless but just has a little bit of grip generated by when you bend the sponge, I guess, a little bit, there is just a little bit of topspin on there, and I'm just going back to pushing a bit here, but very, very easy to hit with off even a low float ball, as you can see. And now just moving to a push, a roll and a hit, and must admit I felt very, very comfortable hitting hard with these anti-spin. Wasn't a lot of tricky behaviour, there's not a lot of side spin or anything like that coming off the ball, but a good penetrative type hit from close up, as you can see there. Really quite easy. And again, the stroke with the push is not much different to the long pips, just a very much a little dab at the ball. And now we're just going to compare the anti-spin on the forehand side. Again, starting with just some basic pushing. You can again see the little bend in my shoulders and the use of the free arm for balance. Again, because I'm just really using the float ball, I'm not trying to generate much, there's not a lot of action. Now just rolling the ball over. Again, feels very, very easy with the anti-spin. Lifts very high. Still trying to keep to just good basic technique, and now starting to hit the ball. And really does feel quite easy with the anti-spin to hit consistently. Definitely a higher margin for error than the long pips, so I felt actually quite comfortable. It's still, compared to an inverted rubber stroke, it would still be a lower margin for error, but definitely a lot easier than the long pip version. And hitting, and now just the little dab, push, a roll and a hit. And again, you can notice with the push not trying to do anything too extravagant. You're not going to generate a lot of pace off that push. There's not a lot of spin, just enough to keep moving the ball around, keep my opponent on his toes, and just a demonstration of good basic technique. Alright, let's move now to a side view of the long pips against the float ball. Interesting things to see here is, again, from the side view it's easy to see how the motion of my bat is really just forward and a little bit down to squirt the ball horizontally over the net. So I'm not really trying to spin underneath the ball at all. Now just a roll. Again, not a lot of wrist action, just I'm looking for consistency, an easy height above the net, so there's plenty of safety, not too much pace. I'm not crowding the table. I don't want to be too close to the table. I want to give myself a little bit of room for any deep balls, and just recovering back to a good neutral position. You can see the bend in the legs there from the stance. Stance could be a little bit wider, but this was after 2 or 3 hours of training already that day, so the legs were getting a bit tired. So that's my excuse in any rate. A little bit of forward lean, which just gives me some room to bring my backswing back in towards my stomach. Without that forward lean, I would really struggle to be able to get a decent backspin. And now just going to one push, one roll, and one hit. And again, the push and the roll are consistent, whereas the hit, I'm still struggling a little bit there to get a consistent result, or a consistently good result on the hit with the long pips. Partly, I guess, due to the fact that it's not a usual shot for me, and also that with long pips the margin for error is considerably lower when trying to hit hard off a low float ball that doesn't allow you to get any real topspin on the stroke. Moving now to the side view of the long pips against float. Again, the little bit of bend, dip in my shoulders there to allow my swing to be comfortable is evident, as is just the simple forward and down movement. Now moving to a roll. Again, a little bit more bending of the knees would I think be appropriate, and would be something I'd do probably more if it was a little bit earlier in the day. Really a little bit more upright than I like here. A little bit more bend going on there. And using, you can see here, good evidence of the waist, stomach and shoulder turn to try and hit the ball. And using really the whole body to help generate power, rather than just trying to generate it from the arm alone. And back to a push, a roll, and a full body turn to generate power. And again, you can notice when I'm hitting the use of that free arm to try and help me balance. Bending of the legs. And the follow through upwards in that saluting motion rather than across my body, all allowing me to come back to my ready position quickly and easily with a minimum of fuss. And it's keeping things simple like that that does allow you to recover faster, which definitely helps when you're getting a bit older like we are. Moving on now to the anti-spin versus float ball from the side view. Good opportunity there just to see how the side stroke is just forward and a little bit down. Not trying to spin under the ball in any way. Just put it back safely, keep it low, move it around, so that when the opponent's not giving me anything, I don't want to take too many chances. And again, that high throw of the anti-spin in comparison to long pips. And you can see here how my left arm, my free arm, is really just hanging in place to keep me balanced. Good little bend of the forward torso there to allow me to have some room to backswing. And you notice as I go to hit harder, I've moved back a little bit further from the table, just to give myself a little bit more room to move, room to swing. And again, as you can probably notice, that my success rate when hitting with the anti-spin is much higher than hitting with the long pips, which really does just reflect the ease of use. Much easier to hit with, a little bit less effective in terms of the result perhaps, but for close to the table players, the anti-spin is definitely a much easier thing to use. And just again, a roll, a hit, and a push, and so on, just to contrast the styles. Alright, now the anti-spin versus float on the forehand side. Another good opportunity just to see how simple the stroke is. Keep it simple, not too much wrist, not too much of a big fancy swing, and just squirt the ball out forward and downwards, just to by swinging forward and downwards, just to keep that ball low, still recovering, still maintaining that little forehand stance, so that when I go to roll I can hit quite easily. Good waist turn, shoulder turn, and then turning back to help contribute to the power. And then as I move from rolling to hitting, you'll notice that I really do just turn a little bit more, and that helps me generate a little bit more power as I guess as I start looking for a stronger stroke. You'll see a little bit more waist turn, a little bit more shoulder turn, and obviously a faster swing to go with it, but still recovering, finishing my stroke up high with a saluting motion so I don't cross too much across my body, drop my hands down, and I'm basically back in my ready position. And again, still would prefer to have the feet a little bit wider, would be nice. Get the stance a little bit wider, a little bit of knee bend there, but could probably use a little bit more, wouldn't hurt either. But again, at the end of the long day, sometimes that's what happens. As your leg power gets a little bit less, you start to stand a bit more upright, and something to watch for. But on the whole, the anti definitely easier to control than the long pips.